So look, this is an unfortunate situation from start to finish, and it should never, ever have happened. If you think about it, when you have somebody walk into, here we are in one of our branches here, if somebody walks into one of our branches, it should never, ever be the case that they walk out in handcuffs. And that's what happened. That's what happened here. So for that, we apologize. I apologize unequivocally, unreservedly that happened. There were challenges with respect to validating the customer's ID, but that doesn't matter. That should never end up the way it ended up in this circumstance. And the police shouldn't have been involved, and that's on us, and we take accountability for that. You asked the question, how do we move on? We've had conversations, I've had many of them personally. We're now up to hundreds of conversations with Indigenous leaders, with our customers, with our employees. I want to thank everybody for those conversations because they've been very valuable in terms of our thinking very deeply about the fact that while these are complex issues, they're also very emotional issues, and they touch on a lot of issues with respect to our past that we're thinking very deeply about. And so for us, it's about teaching, it's about learning, it's about investing in the conversation to move forward, and we think that we'll fundamentally be a lot better for this incident. But right now it's very raw, and it shouldn't have happened, and people are angry and people are upset with us, and we understand that, and I agree with them, and for that I apologize first and foremost.
It seems clear that a mistake was made, multiple mistakes frankly on different people's parts, not just the banks. Was there an internal training issue? I mean, can you identify and say we need to stop doing X and this won't happen, or was it a human error? Yeah, I think it was broader. I think we take accountability, and I say we because it's all of us, in the fact that the escalation that occurred shouldn't have been an escalation to authorities. So we're responsible for that. Training is part of it, but it's also a broader conversation in terms of how we deal with these issues with respect to escalations broadly, because this shouldn't happen to anybody. The last bit of kind of bad news that you were offering up were layoffs, restructuring charges, not something you ever want to say. Banks are a massive employer in this country. It kind of resonates through. Give me a sense of what that was about for you, what it means, and where you are with that restructuring. Yeah, so look, we're in an uncertain world, right? We have lots of conversations about uncertainties in the economy, technology evolutions, globalization, localization. We have lots of changes, and underneath that, the best response from our perspective is a consistent strategy and consistent performance. And when we talk about consistent strategy, we've been at most of our strategies for decades, in some cases, some would say 200 years at the same strategies, and we've been pretty good at them. So we've made decisions in the last 6 months when we're looking at, I would say, a modest but not too profound of a deceleration in North American economies. And we've looked at our responsibilities to shareholders, and we've accelerated our performance. We're taking market share in places where we know we can win, where we've proven we can win. And at the same time, we know we have the least competitive cost structure among our peer set. And that's a fact, and we're addressing that head on. And so the restructuring you referred to, we said we were going to reduce our workforce by 5%. What that means is we're going to have to eliminate some low value work that gets done. You don't just take out 5% of the workforce and ask everybody else to do the same thing. So we're rewiring the accountabilities and the work that gets done. And as we do that, if we can do both of the things that I'm talking about here at the same time, where we can accelerate our performance in places that we can win, and we're doing that very clearly in some of our businesses, both in Canada and the United States, and at the same time get our cost structure to become more competitive, we deliver on that promise to shareholders because, as you know, in Canada, the customer very often is also a shareholder, is often in the community, so we have an accountability on all of those fronts to follow through on. And it happens in a landscape, of course, domestically, where, to your point, I mean, even the IMF numbers today reflect we still get growth. It will be slower growth than many thought, both globally and for Canada. But here we have some very specific issues. So where does, for instance, in the domestic market, household indebtedness, concerns about market, where does that fit into kind of your thinking about your own cost structure and the business of the bank? Yeah, so I think that when you talk about household indebtedness, of course it's a factor. We watch it very carefully. We watch it weekly. We study it. We consider our exposure to it. We happen to be the least exposed to the Canadian household relative to our peers in Canada, but that really isn't, I wouldn't say, is the most important point. I think the most important point to think about is when you look at household indebtedness, you also have to consider the other side of the household's balance sheet. And we're also seeing that the other side of the household's balance sheet with liquid investments, illiquid investments, and the wealth effect is very positive. So we're not actually that concerned with household indebtedness from a pure risk perspective. We're not seeing any trends. When I think about the other part of your question, when you're talking about its implication on the Canadian economy, I think by far the biggest influence on the performance of the Canadian economy is the U.S. economy. And in the U.S., I've said recently that I thought the U.S. economy might slow down to something between 1.5% or 2%. If you ask me to
pick a point in that range 3 or 4 months ago, I probably would have picked 1.5%. Today I'd pick 2%. I actually think we're seeing a little bit more confidence in the commercial side of the business and the corporate side of the business, and we're seeing a little bit of a release relative to what we would have seen in capital formation 3 or 4 months ago. So net, is that number likely to be higher than it was in 2019? No. So we are seeing a slowing, but if we're seeing a slowing to something like 2%, that's not bad, and that's actually, at the end of the day, reasonably constructive on a relative basis for Canada as well.